Hold on.
Hold on, all right, okay. When I did the talk in Joe Hill last year, actually I began by mentioning that Paul Robeson had made the song about him famous. It was Paul Robeson, actually, probably more than anybody else, made the I Dreamed I Saw Joe Hill, a very famous song. It'd been known in the folk tradition, but because Robeson was one of the first world famous people, I would think, like Charlie Chaplin. Everybody knew who Paul Robeson was, everybody knew who Charlie Chaplin was. When he adopted something, he popularised it. And so I think a lot of the credit for the popularity of that song about Joe Hill was down to Paul Robeson. I mean, he was born the son of a slave, and he became, as I said, one of the most famous people in the world. I would argue he's one of the most remarkable Americans of both his time and any time. And as I said, like Chaplin, he became one of the great, because of the way the media and film and radio and everything developed, he became one of the first people probably that most people in the world would have known. I mean, he was best known, obviously, for his singing voice, but that's only a tiny facet of the man's incredible talents. He trained to be a lawyer, and though he actually qualified as a lawyer, remarkably, given the circumstances, he chose acting instead. He played leading roles in a number of films and a number of theatre productions, both in London's West End and Broadway as well. He played, you'll see it in Eleanor's exhibition that's there behind you, you'll get a chance to look at after. But he played Iago, one of the key characters in Shakespeare's Othello. And he played it both in the New York stage and he played it at the centre of the Shakespeare's, the Shakespeare Society, in a sense, at Stratford-on-Avon. It's also the fact that he was an outstanding athlete, whether you wanted to consider him a basketball player, an American football player, or a track and field athlete. He was an incredible athlete. The point is that all of these fantastic achievements were done despite the persecution and the discrimination that was directed against him, simply because he was a proud black American socialist and stood up for himself and other people like him. He was born in 1898 and he would have fought and had to fight what was called in those days Jim Crow racism, which was endemic and to a certain extent still is. Fought it all his life. And actually he was suffered and persecuted for that. But he's remained a tremendous inspiration, and I think it's quite good that we're having, it's not just a historical talk, because what Paul Robeson stood for and what he did is relevant today. He's a huge influence in the Black Lives Matter campaign in America against what's happening in Trump's America. And actually, if you realise that 2 weeks ago in London, there was a demonstration of 15,000 far-right anti-racist groups, really. A real threat, part of a Euro-wide growth in the rise of the far-right politics, particularly directed against immigrants, then I think Paul Robeson's legacy has got a resonance, not just an interest, but a resonance for what's happening today. And it's actually, there's quite a lot being written about him now, and it's probably worthwhile following up. And certainly there'll be a lot more in detail in the wee exhibition that Eleanor's put forward than I'll cover in the talk I'm doing, so folks should take a good look at that as well. I mean, I'd start off by saying that Paul Robeson supported the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War and was famous for that. There's a great biography of him by a man called Martin Duberman, and I want to read a wee quote from that because I think it explains his importance. It says, in December 1937 alone, Paul Robeson made 4 separate appearances in London on behalf of the Spanish Republic. He participated in the concert for Spain at the Scala Theatre. He made a BBC radio broadcast appeal. He sang at a concert sponsored by the Left Book Club, and he appeared on stage at a huge rally in the Albert Hall to raise funds for Civil War victims. Robeson's appearance, according to the newspaper accounts, created a furor of enthusiasm and galvanised the rally. And when he sang, changing the final line of Old Man River from I'm tired of living and scared of dying to I must keep fighting until I'm dying, the Albert Hall went wild. I mean, I first really became conscious of Paul Robeson because of my dad's younger brother, Uncle Edward. He'd been in the 8th Army in Italy during the war and had really fighting, I suppose, fascism. And he was used to sing songs when we were kids, because the television hardly existed. And a Saturday night, everybody went to my granny's and there would be a sing song and a drink. And because I was the first in my generation, I used to get sitting behind the couch listening to them as long as I didn't interrupt and make a noise. And I always remember Uncle Edward singing a song, "We Are the D-Day Dodgers." It was actually written by Hamish Henderson, and it was an attack in the ruling class who were basically attacking the 8th Army as being sworn in themselves in sunny Italy, when in fact the exact opposite of the truth. But the song that everybody in the room liked Uncle Eddie to sing, my granny always, as mothers do, said he should have been an opera singer already. But the song everybody always requested was "Sing Old Man River," and that was how I got to know about Paul Robeson. And later you would see Paul Robeson films on the television. Another person that was hugely influenced by Paul Robeson was Harry Belafonte, who his turn was a great fighter for civil rights and a pro-union man as well, as a matter of fact, that folk don't know a lot about. But in the 50s, when I was a kid, Harry Belafonte was probably the equivalent of Paul Robeson. Harry Belafonte admits in his own biography about the enormous influence Paul Robeson had on him and the political position he took and his willingness to stand up for against racism. And he wrote a thing about him. One of the things that he recalls most of all was how Paul Robeson had to fight to become political. And I want to read a wee quote from Harry Belafonte. Harry Belafonte says, at the time, and I think this is in 1946, I was training to be a young actor with the American Negro Theatre. Its director, Charles Sebrie, gave me my first lead role in 1946 as a young Irish radical in Juno and the Paycock by the Irish playwright Shauna Casey. That the play was about white characters written by a white playwright bothered us not at all. We easily identified with the Irish resisting their British oppressors. We knew exactly how it felt to live in a society where those in power deprived the conquered of their civil rights. On the night before the curtain went up in the first performance of Juno, word went round that Paul Robeson was in the audience. We were so moved that he was there. What was he doing in a humble Harlem theatre? Robeson was the American theatre's great black god, a star of such Promethean talent that he truly had no equal. That had first become clear in his college days, when as the only black student in campus, he was named the valedictorian, that's the student of his year, in 1919. Playing professional football after that, it's American football, no soccer as the American says. Playing professional football after that was just a throwaway for it. By the mid-1920s, he was starring in every major play that had a black lead character, from Eugene O'Neill's The Emperor Jones and All God's Children Got Wings to Shakespeare's Othello. With his remarkable singing voice, Robeson had immortalised the song Old Man River in Showboat and embarked on a parallel career as a performer of folk songs and spirituals. The next bit, I think, is the thing that's important in Harry Belafonte's mind about Robeson. He says, initially Robeson had felt that as an artist he should avoid any political involvement. But on a tour in Wales, at the end of a performance to a sold-out audience, as he left the theatre through the backstage alley at the height of winter, he saw a small group of Welsh miners on strike, standing there with their voices raised in song, trying to raise money for their needy families. Robeson joined the singing with full force. Later he referred to the story as the quintessential moment in the politicisation of his art. The next day he visited the miners in their homes, and from that moment on he never turned his back on needy workers wherever in the world he found them. By the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in 1936, Robeson had begun speaking out against Franco and his fascist takeover in Spain. When Hitler and Mussolini joined forces with Franco, Robeson raised money for the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, an American unit that joined the International Volunteer Army to defend Spain's threatened democracy. He also made headlines by going personally to Madrid. During the destructive bombing of the city by Hitler's Luftwaffe, he stood in the middle of the terror and sang to the liberation forces. Throughout World War II, Robeson had given benefit concerts for the American war effort. He'd also begun to speak out against the racial injustice in the United States. His strong words to baseball club owners helped lead the way to break the sports colour ban. Now that was all very well as long as it was during the Second World War, because the American ruling class were actually forced to tolerate Robeson and his socialist politics, if you like, largely because they didn't want to break. There was a radicalisation in the American working class, the growth of the Popular Front, but also America was allied with Russia in the fight against fascism. And Robeson was important in that, both in Britain and America. There were lots of black troops sent to fight for American freedom when they didn't have freedom at home, as a matter of fact, and Robeson was highly conscious of that. That was okay, so long as that alliance was there. But come the Cold War, that all changed. Robeson had become so popular in the 1940s that the then president, what's his name, that followed Harry Truman, that followed on from Roosevelt. Harry Truman was forced to meet Paul Robeson, but the meetings ended when Robeson insisted that Harry Truman do something about the racist lynchings in the Deep South. And from that point on, Robeson became really public enemy number one, partly because he's communism and partly because his determination to fight for black rights in a segregated racist America. And he found it increasingly, he became a key figure in the witch hunts that started in the 40s, the hearings into un-American activities, and particularly the McCarthy witch hunts in the 50s that folk will know about. There's been quite a few films made about it recently in which Robeson was attacked and vilified. There's a great response, and I noticed it's in Eleanor's card that I'm going to read as well. That when Robeson was accused, I mean, he had a concert at a place called Peekskill, I think it was, in the Catskill Mountains. Him and actually Pete Seeger was involved in it as well, and it was surrounded by racist thugs and attacked, and they had tried to physically attack, probably kill Robeson as well. And when Robeson was hounded by the press for his pro-communism, with jibes like, why don't you get back to Russia, Robeson said this. He acted to it not angrily, but with great dignity, I think. He said, "Because my father was a slave and my people died to build this country, I'm going to stay here and be part of it just like you. No fascist or racist will drive me out. Whether I am a communist or not is irrelevant. The question is whether all American citizens, regardless of their political beliefs, may enjoy their constitutional rights." Really powerful speech. And it was obviously suppressed by the American media, but it got out nonetheless. The outcome was fixed though, and he was banned. His passport was removed eventually. He was banned from performing in America, and he was banned from performing abroad, and it was a pretty hard time. Wasn't just him, but he was a particular target because he was also an anti-racist activist. But it happened to people like Pete Seeger and many others as well, literally prevented from being an entertainer either in his own country or travelling abroad because he'd lost the right to travel. That's the home of the brave and the land of the free for you in the late 1940s, early 1950s. But the interesting thing is that he was eventually able to overcome that. And I think it was in the 1950s he actually used the transatlantic telephone line to broadcast to concerts in London and South Wales. The concert in St Pancras Town Hall was sold out within hours of it being announced, and he sang down the phone line to a packed crowd in London. Paul Robeson should be allowed to sing. There was a similarly in Port Call in Wales. They broadcast it, so they used the transatlantic phone line to subvert the blacklist and the ban on his passport. And actually, when the ban was finally lifted, he came back to Wales in the late 1950s and sang to a huge gathering of Welsh miners, and was a fan of the Welsh miners were his biggest fan. He also, interestingly, came to Glasgow, went on the May Day March in 1960 and sang at the May Day rally. And I know it's available because the Glasgow Trades Council have the YouTube video of the May Day March in Glasgow in 1960 with Paul Robeson in it. So if folk go onto the Glasgow Trades Council Facebook page, there is actually a link to that YouTube video, and you can actually watch it. So, I mean, the other thing about Robeson was that his film career was not a great part of his life, but it was a very important part of his life. The problem was that the situation even then in America was such that black people could only get roles in films or stage plays as basically servants, butlers, maids, or like Amos and Andy, people that were parody of black characters. They were comic characters, they weren't serious people at all. They were like what Shakespeare called in his plays the rude mechanics. In other words, they weren't really part of the theatre. Robeson fought that all his life as an actor. I mean, I've already read quotes there from Harry Belafonte about the roles he played. But he found it increasingly difficult to get parts, frustrating to get parts. I mean, there's a DVD that's got a collection of 5 of the 11 films that he made. Hold on a second, I'll just remember them. The ones that are on the DVD are Body and Soul, Big Fella, Sanders of the River, Song of Freedom, and King Solomon's Mines. Body and Soul is a remarkable film because it's the first American film with an all-black cast. And because, as I said, up until then, to be a black actor, you had to basically be a parody of black people, or, you know, some butler on the side that the real characters are all white. It was a very racist industry, and to a certain degree still is, if you ask, in America, where black people don't feature as much as they should. But he was forced really to come to Britain to develop his career in films. And actually he made some very good films. The one that I mentioned, Song of Freedom, is the first expression of black pride in an English language film, and is worth watching. He's probably famous for I think it was, what was it called? Sanders of the River. Actually, when he made that, he didn't understand what he was going to be making. It's an apology for British colonialism, you know, about how patronising and friendly the British were to the African tribes and so on. And when it was made, he quite rightly disowned it. The only thing worth watching about the film is the fact that he's in it, his appearance in it. It's actually quite a whitewash of British colonialism across the world. Towards the end of his life, not towards the end of his life, but later on, the Caribbean Marxist C.L.R. James, who had written the book Toussaint Louverture about the first slave rebellion led by black people in Haiti, had been written as a book, and he wanted to make it into a play. And C.L.R. James and Paul Robeson and Sergei Eisenstein, the great Russian film director, collaborated and wanted to make it a film. But neither Joe Stalin nor the Hollywood moguls would allow that to happen. It's a great pity, because actually that would have been a vehicle for Robeson's acting talents. It would have been a film worthy of the character that Paul Robeson was. And it's a shame it was never made, because I think he would have been a great Toussaint Louverture. I don't think there's ever been a film made. There was a great film made with Marlon Brando called, the English translation of it is Burn, but the film was made by the guy who made the Battle of Algiers, and it's called Queimada, and it's about the slave revolt, although it doesn't specify Toussaint Louverture. But you can get that in DVD, and it's one of the best, I think, one of the best political films you'll ever see. It's about imperialism and how it wasn't William Wilberforce, particularly a good guy as he was, that abolished slavery. It was black people themselves rising up in revolt and mounting an insurrection against the colonial powers that ruled the Caribbean. That would have been a great film. The thing is, towards the end of his life, Robeson, and it comes out, and his son Paul wrote a book about him as well, it comes out how much Robeson really suffered for the persecution and discrimination. I mean, in his health. I mean, he suffered for fits of depression later in his life because his career was curtailed by these people who didn't want him to develop and to relate to his audience, and that affected his health. He had bouts of depression, and he even contemplated suicide. But like in the song Old Man River, Paul just kept rolling along. And actually, when he died in 1976, the American white establishment, the white media, were actually forced to concede that in inverted commas, he was a great American. And they had to play down the racism and the discrimination and the persecution that directed at him throughout his life. They finally had to admit he was a great man. Actually, I want to end a bit on not what the American establishment said about him officially after persecuting him for the whole of his life, but what a black prisoner in an Illinois penitentiary wrote a poem about Paul Robeson when he died, when this guy was in jail. It's a quite wee simple poem, but it actually sums up how he and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people like him felt about Paul Robeson and what he meant for them. And it's this. It's a wee poem. It says, "They cut the leaves from his limbs and tore the bark from his tree, but his roots were so deep that they are still a part of me." And I think that applies to us about Paul Robeson, that he was a giant influence in the politics that socialists espouse today, and he's somebody that we should remember and apply his strength and his spirit to the struggles that we face today. But I'll leave it there, and if there's any questions, and I'd advise you to have a good look at Eleanor's.
Are there any questions that people have got?
Just when you were saying about the singing on the phone, I think I read that book as well. We also did concerts on the Canadian border, the American border with Canada, and tens of thousands of people used to turn up just to listen. But another, just a wee aside, his son actually turned up at Mayday,
Right.
Glasgow, I think, in the 90s.
1990.
But sadly, he wasn't allowed on the platforms. We did a meeting outside the main hall or the main tent, but I found that a bit strange that somebody his stature wasn't given the privilege of addressing the masses.
Seems to have been ahead of his time with the live streaming. No, I mean, the Joe Robeson down the phone.
Yeah.
Because they're just coming into that now with sort of stuff from cinemas and theatres. Although it's more 3D and all that, it's just a video goes with it.
Yeah, they packed. It was the town hall in London was packed, sold out.
Well, I have actually got a number of Paul Robeson's songs. I have to say that when I was producing these in our kitchen back in Dunoon, some of you may know that we had a 4-star licensed B&B. So I'm doing this, and a guest arrived, and the next thing was, he said to Suzanne, "Oh, I can hear Paul Robeson playing in the background." And so this morning when I was cooking him breakfast, I went after breakfast and spoke to the guy, and I said, I hear that you know who Paul Robeson was. He said, yeah. He said, I can sing you a couple of verses of Joe Hill if you like. So I'm going to have to give him a Paul Robeson discount, aren't I? Really, before he leaves. Because there's not many of them around, is there? So there you go. That just shows he was a teacher from Leeds, actually retired, as you might imagine, but that's why he's